I never imagined that Christmas would be the day my own parents erased us from their lives. Christmas was supposed to mean warmth, laughter, family, a table full of food and a room full of voices that felt safe. But that night, the air felt heavy, like something bad was waiting to happen. I remember sitting there, trying to breathe normally, telling myself I was overthinking. I was wrong. The words still echo in my head, clear and sharp, like they were carved into my memory. Take your child and leave, and never come back. They didn't whisper it. They didn't pull me aside. They said it across the table, in front of everyone, in front of my 8-year-old daughter. She was holding her fork when it happened. Her hand froze in the air. Her eyes moved from my parents to me, searching my face for an answer I didn't have. She didn't understand why her grandparents suddenly looked so cold. She didn't understand why the room went quiet. I did. In that moment, I knew this dinner was never about Christmas. It was about rejection. It was about reminding me where they thought I belonged. The house looked exactly the same as when I was a child. The same decorations, the same lights, the same long dining table. I had sat at that table every Christmas growing up, laughing, opening gifts, feeling protected. But now, sitting there as an adult, I felt like a stranger who had overstayed her welcome. I hadn't been back in almost 3 years, not because I didn't want to come, but because after my divorce, everything changed. My husband didn't just leave me, he walked out of our lives without warning. One day he was there, and the next he was gone. No explanation, no goodbye, just silence. I was left with a broken heart and a child who kept asking questions I didn't know how to answer. I worked 2 jobs just to keep us afloat. I skipped meals so my daughter could eat. I smiled in front of her even when I felt empty inside. Every night, after she fell asleep, I let myself cry quietly in the dark. But to my parents, none of that mattered. They didn't see strength, they saw shame, and shame had no place at their table. I almost didn't come to that Christmas dinner. Something inside me warned me not to go. But my daughter begged me. She sat next to me one evening and said, "Mom, can we please have Christmas with Grandma and Grandpa this year? Just once?" Just once. That's all she wanted. She missed having a big family. She missed feeling normal. So I ignored my instincts and said yes. I bought simple gifts, nothing expensive, just thoughtful. And for my daughter, I bought a small red dress. She twirled in front of the mirror and smiled, then looked at me and asked, "Do I look okay, Mom?" That question hurt more than anything. No child should ever have to wonder if they're enough. At dinner, everything felt forced. My mother smiled, but her eyes were cold. My father barely spoke to me. They talked about neighbors, about the weather, about everything except us. My daughter sat quietly, afraid to say the wrong thing. She kept glancing at me like she needed permission just to exist. I noticed the way my mother looked at her, not with love, with judgment. Halfway through the meal, my father finally looked at me and said, "So, how long are you planning to live like this?" The room went silent. I felt my chest tighten. "Live like what?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Struggling," he said, "raising a child alone, depending on pity." I told him I was working. I told him I was taking care of my daughter. My mother laughed, a short, cold laugh, and said, "Barely. You should have thought about that before ruining your marriage." That's when I realized this wasn't concern. This was punishment. Then my father put his fork down and said, "We've made a decision." My heart dropped. "We don't want this situation in our family anymore," he said. And then he looked at me and said the words that broke everything. "Take your child and leave, and don't ever return." I felt dizzy, my ears rang. My mother looked straight at my daughter and said, "She's going to grow up broken, just like you." My daughter's eyes filled with tears. She leaned toward me and whispered, "Mom, did I do something wrong?" That question shattered me. I stood up, my hands shaking, and told them they didn't get to talk about my child like that. They didn't argue, they didn't apologize. They were done with us. I grabbed our coats and carried my daughter out of that house. The Christmas lights blinked behind us like nothing had happened. No one followed, no one stopped us. We stood outside in the cold night, alone, my daughter crying into my shoulder. What my parents didn't know, what they couldn't imagine, was that 5 minutes later, everything they thought they controlled was about to change. We had barely reached the end of the driveway when my phone started vibrating in my pocket. At first, I ignored it. My hands were shaking too badly to answer. My daughter was still crying, her arms wrapped tightly around my neck, her face buried in my coat. Every step away from that house felt heavy, like I was carrying more than just her weight. I was carrying years of pain. The phone vibrated again. Then again. I stopped walking. Something told me this call mattered. I gently set my daughter down in the car, buckled her seatbelt, and told her, "Just give me 1 minute, okay?" She nodded, wiping her eyes, trying to be brave in a way no child should ever have to be. I answered the call. Is this Emily Carter?" the voice asked. "Yes," I said, my throat tight. "This is Mr. Reynolds. I'm calling about your parents' property." My heart skipped. "What about it?" I asked. There was a pause on the other end. "I was told you might be nearby. We've been trying to reach your parents all evening." I glanced back at the house. The lights were still on. The laughter had returned, like nothing had happened. "I'm right outside," I said slowly. "Why?" "Because there's been a serious issue," he said, "and legally you need to hear this." My stomach dropped. He explained that he was my grandfather's estate attorney, the same grandfather my parents rarely spoke about. The man who raised me for a large part of my childhood while my parents were busy building their perfect image. I hadn't seen him in years before he passed, not because I didn't love him, but because my parents made it difficult. Phone calls went unanswered, messages never reached him. I always thought it was distance. I was wrong. Mr. Reynolds told me that my grandfather had left a final amendment to his will, an amendment that had been delayed due to paperwork issues, an amendment that had just been approved that morning, and in that amendment my parents were removed, completely. Everything, the house, the land, the accounts, had been placed into a trust, for me, and my daughter. I couldn't speak. My knees felt weak. What does that mean?" I finally asked. "It means," he said carefully, "that as of today, your parents no longer legally own this property." I turned slowly and looked at the house again. The same house they had just thrown us out of. The same house they believed was theirs. My hands started shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from shock. "And there's more," he added. My heart pounded. "More?" "Yes," he said. "Your grandfather left a letter. He requested that it be read to you first." I sat in the car, staring at the steering wheel, listening as he read words written by a man who had truly seen me. In the letter, my grandfather apologized. He apologized for not protecting me sooner, for trusting my parents when he shouldn't have, for believing they would change. He wrote that he saw how they treated me after the divorce, how they cut me off, how they spoke about my daughter. He wrote that he didn't trust them with anything that carried his name anymore. And then he wrote something that made my chest ache. "You were always stronger than they ever were, and one day they will learn that cruelty has a cost." When the call ended, I sat there in silence. 5 minutes earlier, I had been thrown out like nothing. Now, the truth had quietly turned everything upside down. I didn't go back inside. Not yet, because something inside me told me this wasn't the moment for anger. This was the moment for patience. Over the next few days, memories started coming back. Things I had ignored, things that finally made sense. I remembered how my parents always spoke badly about my grandfather when I was younger, how they said he was controlling, how they insisted I didn't need to talk to him so often, how letters went missing, how calls were forgotten. They had slowly erased him from my life, and when he got sick, they told me it wasn't serious. By the time I found out the truth, it was too late. That wasn't care, that was control. I realized then that my parents didn't just betray me that night. They had been betraying me for years. They used my divorce as an excuse, a reason to push me out, a reason to justify their cruelty. But the truth was simpler. I didn't fit their image anymore. A single mother didn't look good to their friends. A struggling daughter didn't match their story. So they chose reputation over family. And they paid for it. Because while they were busy pretending to be perfect, my grandfather saw everything, and he made sure that when the truth came out, it would come out quietly, legally, and in a way they could never deny. That night at Christmas dinner wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment the power shifted, and they didn't even know it yet. I didn't rush back into that house. I didn't call them. I didn't celebrate. I stayed quiet. Because the strongest revenge doesn't shout, it waits. For years, my parents had controlled the story, what people saw, what people believed. They were respected, admired, the kind of couple everyone thought was generous and kind. And I knew something important now. If I acted too fast, they would twist the truth like they always did. So I planned carefully. The attorney explained everything in detail over the next few days. The trust was airtight. The documents were clear. My grandfather had anticipated resistance. He had written clauses that prevented manipulation, delays, or emotional pressure. He knew exactly who my parents were. The house, the land, the accounts, all of it now belonged to the trust, and I was the trustee, not them. The same people who told me to leave and never return were now living in a house they didn't own. I didn't need to embarrass them online. I didn't need to yell or insult them. I just needed to let the truth reach them the same way their cruelty reached me. Quietly, officially. I let a week pass, then 2. My parents started calling. At first, they were polite, confused. They left messages asking why a lawyer had contacted them, why documents were arriving in the mail, why bank accounts were suddenly restricted. I didn't answer. Then the tone changed. My mother cried on voicemail, saying there must be a mistake. My father demanded explanations. He said I was being disrespectful, ungrateful. The same man who told me to never come back. Still, I said nothing. I let the attorney handle everything. He sent them a formal notice explaining their situation. Clear, simple, cold, just like the way they had spoken to me at that table. They had 30 days to vacate the property. I imagined the moment they read that letter. I imagined the silence that followed, the confusion, the fear, the disbelief. And for the first time, I knew exactly how they felt. A few days later, my parents finally showed up at my door, unannounced. My daughter was in the living room coloring when the doorbell rang. I told her to stay where she was. When I opened the door, my mother looked smaller somehow, older. My father stood stiff, his face pale. They didn't look powerful anymore. My mother said, "We need to talk." I didn't invite them in. "There's nothing to talk about," I replied calmly. My father tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to justify everything they had ever done. He said they were only trying to help me, that they were worried about my future, about my daughter. I listened without interrupting. Then I said, "You told us to leave and never come back. I respected your wish." My mother started crying. She said they didn't mean it, that it was said in anger, that family says things they don't mean. I looked at her and said, "You meant it enough to say it in front of a child." That stopped her. I told them the truth, not with anger, not with pride, just facts. I told them about my grandfather, about the trust, about the letter, about the decision they couldn't undo. My father's face went blank. The realization hit him slowly, like a wave he couldn't escape. This is our home," he said quietly. I shook my head. No, I said. It was his, and now it's mine, and you lost it the moment you chose cruelty over family. They stood there speechless. For years, I had been the weak one, the disappointing one, the child who needed guidance. Now, they had nothing to say. I closed the door gently, not to hurt them, but to end the conversation. Over the next few weeks, everything unraveled for them. Friends found out, questions were asked, stories didn't add up. The perfect image they worked so hard to protect started cracking. They moved out quietly. No dramatic scenes, no public arguments, just silence. And that silence said everything. I took my daughter back to the house one last time, not to claim it, not to celebrate, but to say goodbye. I told her, this place doesn't define us. Love does. We didn't move in. We chose peace instead, because revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about refusing to become what hurt you. And in the end, they lost more than a house. They lost us. I didn't feel victory the way I thought I would. There was no moment where I stood in front of a mirror and smiled, proud of what I had done. No rush of joy, no loud celebration. What I felt instead was quiet, a deep, heavy quiet that settled in my chest and slowly turned into peace. My parents tried to reach out again months later. Short messages, careful words, apologies that sounded more like regret than understanding. They said they missed us. They said family should forgive. I read those messages more than once, and then I put the phone down, because forgiveness doesn't mean returning to the same place where you were broken. My daughter changed after that Christmas, not overnight, but slowly. She stopped asking why people left. She stopped wondering if she was the reason adults were angry. One night, as I tucked her into bed, she looked at me and said, "Mom, I think we're okay now." I had to turn away so she wouldn't see my tears. We built a life that didn't depend on approval. We created our own traditions, simple ones: pancakes on Sunday mornings, movie nights on the floor, quiet Christmases filled with warmth instead of tension. I thought about my grandfather often, about the way he saw the truth when others refused to. He didn't leave me revenge. He left me protection. He didn't punish my parents with anger. He held up a mirror and let them face the cost of their choices. That was the real lesson. Cruelty always has a price. Sometimes it's paid in public. Sometimes it's paid in silence. But it is always paid. I don't hate my parents. I don't wish them harm. I simply accepted that love without respect isn't love at all. That Christmas night taught me something I will carry forever. You don't lose family when they reject you. You lose illusions. And sometimes losing those illusions is the beginning of a life that finally belongs to you.